Welcome back to the Bliss of the Abyss with your host, Robin Neumark Jones. That's me. Hello, and thanks for tuning in again. This week on the podcast, we have a dear friend of mine and a geopolitics expert, Chris Birks, and of course, we are discussing the war in Ukraine. So, last week we had a Ukrainian, my friend Rob Feldman, from the ground in Ukraine. This week we have a slightly removed perspective, although it's not entirely removed because, as you'll hear in this episode, Chris's partner is just about to head to the Polish-Ukrainian border on humanitarian work. So, good luck out there. Again, I'm not going to say any names, just in case, but stay safe. I'll be thinking of you. We have a couple of people who've read up about it and have immersed themselves in this war. Chris is a fanatic on this stuff. This is what he spends his time doing when he's not doing other things. And then next week, we're going to have a Russian on the show. I can't say too much about what that's going to be, and I'm going to be hiding their identity for obvious security reasons. But I wanted to give a few different perspectives on this war. So one from the ground in Ukraine, one from a removed Western perspective, one from the ground in Russia, and I'm going to try and find a pro-invasion voice so that I can hear exactly where they're coming from, how they have arrived at that conclusion, because it's so obviously, to me, a no-brainer, but it's not a simple situation, is it? So, of course, I'm completely against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I was against the annexation of Crimea and the subsequent Russian military activities in eastern Ukraine. But there's a lot of people who aren't, and some of them are bad faith actors, and some of them are stooges, and some of them are paid lip service. But I believe there are some true believers out there who I think are deluded. And I've reached out to a few people. I'm going to keep reaching out to a few more. Typically, a lot of these people do not want to engage in this discussion because their arguments, quite frankly, cannot hold up to scrutiny. But if someone is willing to engage with me on this, maybe write in blissoftheabyss@gmail.com. I'd be fascinated to hear from you. Hey, if you really truly believe it, then stand by it and be willing to hear the opposing side. Because from where I'm sitting, there is no defense. You can talk to me all you like about Russian sphere of influence and Ukrainian biochemical labs that target Russian DNA, as if that held any weight. For those of you who don't know, that is one of the Russian propaganda talking points, that they have these biolabs that Ukrainians have been developing that would specifically target Russian DNA. Well, how does that work, considering there are so many ethnic Russians in Ukraine? A massive proportion. Go and look at the population stats, and you think if that makes any sense. Anyway, I am open to having a discussion with someone who genuinely believes that. So if you can find someone, or if you know someone, send them my way. I'd be fascinated to hear and engage with them on that. In the meantime, I'm going to present these at least three sides of this debate. So firstly, we had Feldman, who is living in the war right now in Ukraine. I'm going to give his location away, but he's right there. And I'm sure we'll have him back on soon to see how things have evolved. And thanks to everyone who supported the fundraiser. We did manage to raise some money for that, and of course all of the money from the Patreon donations that month all went towards the link that Rob gave us to help Ukraine. I will put that link again in this week's show notes as well. And then this week we're going to have more of a removed academic, in quotes, perspective on the war, looking at it from a more geopolitical lens. And then, like I said, we're going to have a Russian on the ground in a place in Russia. And I'm going to do my best to keep this person completely anonymous because they're going to be speaking in very difficult situation and crazy circumstances where they don't have control of their own destiny. And I'm going to do my absolute best to make sure I do not endanger this person, because I think when you hear what they have to say, that it will be a perspective that needs to be heard and will make you think. Anyway, this is the Bliss of the Abyss, and we thought when we started this podcast that we'd get through COVID and get out the other side. And, you know, I've got an audition next week and it's in person, and those are starting to come back. So there is going to be a change. And I think the world was getting ready for that change. After years of lockdowns and masks and vaccines and lives put on hold and careers snafu'd. And now instead we have war in Europe for the first significant time since World War II. I believe 10 million people displaced, millions of refugees. And this is not to downplay any other war or conflict that may have been going on since or may still be going on. And we get into these conflicts actually in this discussion. Syria, Yemen, Georgia, many others as well. This is not to downplay that. I am against the war. I am against any war. As you'll hear in this podcast, if you get that far, me and Chris talk about Chislehurst Caves, which is a man-made cave complex in the UK that was excavated initially thousands of years ago and used by the Druids, the Saxons, the Romans, and then the British in World War I as a munition store, and in World War II as a bomb shelter, where up to 15,000 people at one point were staying there every night. And that was fighting what I would call, and what John Rawls calls, a just war. And I would not be talking to you today if the Nazis had not been defeated in that war. I have some British, quote-unquote, blood inside of me and some Jewish. And some of those are the same blood. And you know what? Fuck it. It doesn't fucking matter. But all of that war stuff, what an academic, is bollocks. Okay? But unfortunately there are aggressors in this world. And there are defenders. And right now, I think, and I am throwing my weight behind the fact that we need to defend Ukraine against this illegal, immoral aggression against their sovereignty, against that nation, against their people, against their children, elderly, men, women, everybody, artists, scientists, fathers, daughters, sisters, everybody. And so that's why I am focusing on this. Because who knows where the fuck we will be. It's the 20th of March, 2022. And I am praying that this conflict has some kind of positive outcome. But you tell me, Bliss of the Abysses, where you see that. Because right now, from where I'm sitting, the best I can see is a ceasefire and Ukraine ceding territory and Russia gaining a land grab. You tell me if you feel more confident. Because it could get a hell of a lot worse than that, but that does not feel like justice to me. And in fact, since we recorded this show last night, minutes after we stopped recording, a ceasefire was offered by the Russians in Mariupol, which the Ukrainians quite swiftly rejected. And to be honest, I can see why, quite frankly, if you've read up on any of the quote-unquote humanitarian corridors that Russia has opened Ukraine, only to then fire on people trying to evacuate or fire on people who were just still there, and there was no ceasefire actually offered. It was all a lie. So the poor people of Mariupol seem destined to suffer another day of conflict. But we'll see the situation is developing rapidly. That is true as of now, the 21st of March. Anyway, in this discussion, sorry it's late, my voice is leaving me. In this discussion, we do get into all of this. And it's a fascinating discussion with a very learned person and then me as well. So, without any further ado, would you please welcome Mr. Chris Birks. Recording in progress. Did you hear that?
I did, yeah.
It's all good.
I've got it being recorded. It's okay.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, welcome back to the Bliss of the Abyss. International relations expert Christopher Monsignor Birks.
I'm not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast. And that is actually true. I'm not an expert. I am just an enthusiast.
I believe you have a degree in history.
I have a good degree in history, but only to a Bachelor of Arts level. That did not turn into a glorious master's in international relations or anything like that. That is the end of my decorated expertise.
That's right. But you are an enthusiast, as you said. Me and you have talked about history well into the night. I think we've read up on it a lot, and we understand sort of the broader arcs, the broad themes. Yes. We know quite a lot about leaders throughout history and movements.
Yes. And is this video going out to people at all?
The video I'll put it probably on the Patreon.
Right. Okay. Well, so people on Patreon then, the Berlin and the Stalingrad you can see behind me are not representative of my historical preclusions. They're just good reads.
They just happen to be carefully placed in view.
They're just good reads. They're not my favorites.
But also, obviously, your partner is about to head to the front line. Is it tomorrow?
She is. Yeah. My partner works for the Red Cross, so she's going out there tomorrow she's going to the Polish-Ukrainian border to sort of witness what's going on there, really, and also try and get some stories from there as well of volunteers. Probably not of refugees, given the sensitivity of their situation, but hopefully of some volunteers as well to try and get some of that story back. Because, of course, the worst thing about not the worst thing, but the thing about people giving huge amounts of money. So the UK has given enough to the Red Cross to be the equivalent of more than £3 for every single person living in the country, which is great.
Yeah.
But the problem is a lot of that's come through newspapers, etc., and indeed people. And one of the big problems with being a charity, when you get money, when you go and do it, is obviously people want to see what that money can do.
Yeah.
And so she's going out to sort of do a little bit of that as well, try and get some stories back.
Right. Make sure that the money's going to the right places.
Well, I can assure you the money is going to the right places.
Good. Yeah, because I know that people are very worried about that.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely going to the right places. But it's more about getting those stories back to show people that it is going to the right places.
Right. Yeah. Because so obviously today we're going to be pretty much focused heavily on the unfolding war in Ukraine. Because of the sheer amount of stories. And Like one today, let's kick it off with this. One today that I read about, I don't know if you've seen this. I'll be sharing my screen a lot. I imagine you will be as well. Is this about, well, perhaps you can read the headline. Have you seen this one?
It says that 56 elderly people killed by Russian forces. Okay,
yeah,
right.
So it's this.
Yeah.
So this is a quote from Ludmila Denisova, who's Ukraine's human rights ombudsman, who says that in the town of Kreminna on March 11th, Russian occupiers cynically and purposely fired from a tank at a home for the elderly. 56 residents who lived to their old age died on the spot. And then the survivors, which were 15 people, were abducted by the occupiers and taken to an occupied territory in Svatove, to the regional geriatric boarding school.
Yeah.
It's just one of those many stories that's coming out.
Yeah.
And there's so many. It's such an overwhelming amount.
Yeah.
It's such a quick pace.
Yes.
Obviously, I don't want to be spreading misinformation. This is from The Guardian, who in general are quite a trusted news source, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so what you're jumping in at here, misinformation, who to trust, what to trust, when not to trust it, is probably my big thing in terms of not just this war, but actually what's been going on in Ukraine since 2014.
Since Crimea and the revolution.
Well, actually more the spring, but yes, of course, it wasn't called the spring. What was it called? It had a name.
Revolution of Color, is it?
Right, exactly. Right, yeah. So there's that 14 and Crimea and Syria and Yemen. So again, where I was very frustrated for all these years about what do I do to find information, when the mainstream media gets bored, as it does tend to do. I mean, like, who's heard about Syria in X amount of years? Well, but guess what? It's been going on for over a decade. Same with Yemen, all these sort of things. So that's where to find information when like the media gets bored, and B, as you rightly say, well, hang on a minute. And this came up for me quite a lot in the Revolution of Color, that's what it's called, and Syria, when I started to get the situation where like there was another discourse, there was another narrative coming in, which was totally odd to the narrative that I was receiving from my good old-fashioned BBC and everything else. And I started to be like, well, hang on a minute, what's true? Maybe the Ukrainian Nazis did open fire in the square first, and it was the Ukrainian army that was protecting people. Maybe it was maybe it was the Syrian rebels that dropped the chemical bombs first, that sort of thing, or maybe they were doing it as well. There is this thing, I hope you've come across it. If people haven't come across it, they must come across it. It is called Bellingcat. I mean,
hey, great tip. Let me look it up. Carry on.
Absolutely. So Bellingcat, they have a website and it's very, very good, but really what you want to be following is the Twitter. So Bellingcat is open source news analysis, source analysis. So at a very, very basic level, let's say there is, a guy being interviewed somewhere in the world, somewhere. What Bellingcat will do, they'll look at that footage and they'll look at the topography, the buildings in the background, compare that to Google Maps, compare that to other footage from similar places, blah, 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 and essentially build up the story of, yes, they were there, or no, they were not there. And so actually it works as it is actual real debunking. And they became very famous because they were the guys that essentially proved that the oh my god, I'm going to forget the number. That's terrible. MH211, 217. Oh my gosh,
the Malaysian
one. That was shot down. So they were the guys that proved that it was the Russian separatists, because you may remember there was the whole, no, it wasn't Russian separatists, it was Ukraine. They were the guys, and what they did was they intercepted some radio telephone calls, did voice analysis against those things to known recordings of other players on the scene, and were able to say this person, this telephone call is this person here. They've also done a little bit, something that's not quite so, if you like, war. So they, with the explosion in Beirut, were able to look at all the different angles and saying, okay, well, this color emerges here. So that suggests that this chemical was in the, sorry, I'm talking about the explosion when that dock went up, when that storage thing went up in Lebanon. So not quite so overtly war. So anyway, that's what they do. And they are amazing. it's not just Bellingcat, but they sort of have a big retweet network.
Mm.
And essentially, that is what I follow. And that is how I sort of work out what is or isn't going on. It's obviously not, they don't do everything,
Of course.
but it's really good in working out what is real and what isn't real. And I sort of am of the opinion that unless I've seen it proven or analyzed on Bellingcat, basically by the internet, by the open source, by
Right.
everybody does this. That's the idea. You could right now go and look at some photographs, could try and geolocate it to Google Maps, and you could upload your or tweet your findings to Bellingcat, and that would become part of their investigation. So, for example, today there's been a big thing. So, it's been today and yesterday. So the Russian separatists, remember them? They released a video of sort of saying that we've just used thermobaric.
Oh yeah. Thermobaric. Yeah.
Thermobaric.
It's the ones that cause even more damage, isn't it?
Yeah, like the first
it like puts particles in the air and then it ignites the particles.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think it's like bunker busting, or at least an evolution of bunker busting. Anyway, so the separatists sent out this video saying, here is the first glorious use of thermobaric weapons. And what for the last 2 days Bellingcat have been doing is that they go, oh, right, this is interesting. So hang on. So what angle is this looking at? Okay, so this appears to be firing, therefore, in these possible directions. Oh, notice those rockets have set fire to the ground around it. Let's go on Google Maps and let's see where we can see some burnt fields in that area. And they're doing what they're trying to do really is they're trying to work out where that was fired. Because obviously, if it was fired at a civilian place, let's say Mariupol, which is obviously what people are really looking at, then we might have some actual evidence here of a crime, of a war crime, of a crime against humanity, whichever terminology you're choosing. So that's this sort of amazing stuff that they do. And basically, if you don't follow Bellingcat, if you don't know about Bellingcat, welcome to your new way of following the situation.
So has there been any like big scoops that they've bunked or debunked?
Oh, dude,
this war.
There's so well. So for this war, I mean, there's so many. So first of all, there's endless. You can look at now. So much evidence of use of cluster bombs, which Russia have been doing since day one, which is sort of amazing. Really,
they're banned, aren't they?
Yeah, well, they're banned, but Russia and Ukraine have not signed up to not using them. And Bellingcat are not biased. They have also been looking at saying, well, there's a possibility of it being used by Ukraine, although nowhere near as, although they haven't, I didn't see much more on that. I just saw the main guy, this guy Elliot, saying, can I get more pictures of here, please? Can we look into this? But loads of
Russia just egregiously.
dude, like from day one, which is sort of amazing, really. But the big scoops really is, so there's been a really interesting, a new thing, which is so loads of Russian debunking stuff turned up. So saying, do not believe this piece of Ukrainian propaganda. So for example, it'd be a blown up tank with a Z on it. And the Russian debunking is, well, this isn't that. Actually, this is a Ukrainian tank, and they've put the Z on, and they'll show the before with no Z and an after with Z. What Bellingcat found, this is this amazing new phenomena, was that debunking is actually fake. And so the first time that the picture with no Z emerges is in the debunking that claims that it's been going around as propaganda. So it's we're really through the looking glass here, where there's disinformation, disproving disinformation. Well, no, that's it. Disinformation, disproving disinformation that actually never was disinformed in the first place. So that sort of stuff is really, really incredible. But also the main thing about Bellingcat, because they've been following this for so long, they've been following Syria. They've been following, because like Russia are very heavily involved in Syria and have been for since,
and I wanted to ask you about the troops, but
well, exactly.
But so carry on, and we'll talk about that.
So, and essentially, what the Bellingcat thing is, and it's like, well, actually, the precedent here is basically, I don't want to say they're very good. They're like, we don't want to say ignore everything that Russia says, but what we've learned over the last 8 years of following the Russian propaganda system very, very closely is essentially don't believe that anything Russia says. And there's a really interesting thing. So, for example, you remember when everyone was saying, "Oh, Russia are talking about the use of chemical weapons," and we, for example, we had our prime minister and everyone else saying, "We think this is going to be evident. We think they're setting up to use chemical weapons themselves." But it's interesting that Bellingcat was saying, "Nah, mate, they've talked like this all the time. This is what they do all the time in Syria. They're not even doing that. They're just filling the airwaves with stuff."
Just as much crap as you can plug, so it's non-stop.
Exactly. Bellingcat said if they do go on to use chemical weapons on the basis of this, that would be the exception. So really interesting stuff like this. Now, go on.
Terrifying. Oh, it's terrifying. But hold your point, because I am interested to see where you're going to go. But I wanted to ask about the Syria thing because, obviously, one of the narratives that I think might have been lost, maybe amidst all of the headlines and screaming and the back and forth, is, like you said, this war in Syria that's been going on for over a decade, and the fact that Assad was basically about to fall before Russia came in and propped him up. And he's now cashing in his chips. And I read it's up to 40,000 Syrian troops who are going to be drafted to fight with the Russians in the Ukrainian front. Have you read this as well?
Yeah, I have. Although this is a wonderful thing about, sort of the caveat would be there's some great guys that are involved, because I say, not just Bellingcat retweet really good people. You end up finding yourself in this really good network. And there's a really good tweet that said, well, 40,000 Syrians might be coming, but logistics is still the problem. And if they still have no food and if they still have no weapons, then, that.
So it's more like, he's like, we'll send 40,000 troops.
But it may not. What I was saying is it may not be.
How is that?
Like, oh God, here comes 40,000 crack death troops. Although they are troops very, very good at fighting street to street, which is one thing the Russians are not interested in or experienced in at all, as Chechnya and as Syria show us.
Grozny.
Exactly. But the Syria thing, I personally think that this is what this is all about. I think that the history books in X amount of years will not say, and then in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. This will be an event as part of the long involvement in the Syrian war, is my personal. Well, it's not personal, for God's sake.
Sure, no. There's other. So why do you think Syria's the linchpin underneath this?
Because basically Russia have got themselves in a situation whereby, now I'm going to get my dates wrong a bit. I think it was 8 years ago they got involved, and I think it was something like 6 years ago. There was sort of like, the Russians very much, if you like, were able to, not the Russians and the Syrians were able to say we've won, for want of a better word, or it's over, for want of a better word. But basically, since then, 6 years, I think. Forgive me on the dates, everybody.
We can check this.
They've basically been unable to leave Assad to do his own thing. They've been unable to sort of create a stable Assad capable of fighting and defending and supporting himself, or themselves, if you just think of the government. And so Russia basically got themselves stuck in Syria. And this is starting to get really quite bad because, so first of all, there's a big American-supported third in the middle, which is stubborn and won't go anywhere. So they're sort of locked in this sort of proxy battle here between them. I mean, because obviously the Russians are quite directly involved, actually. It's not just like Russian supported, they're sort of...
No, boots on the ground, elite forces, exactly. And they're training the Syrian army.
And obviously the Air Force and all sorts, So they've got this problem where there's a third of the Americans here, so they're stuck there. But the big problem for me, and where I think there's some real clues as to what this is all about, is the fact that they're fighting Turkey, really, in the northwest of Syria. And this nearly went hot last year before, nearly went directly between them. And Turkey have also been selling drones to Ukraine. And in the months quite a few months, but in the months before this Ukrainian invasion, the Turkish drones were kicking Russian armor's arse in the Donbass.
I didn't.
Exactly. So all of a sudden, this Turkish supplied machinery to Ukraine was starting to turn the tide in the Donbass, which has basically been a fairly, for want of a better word, for Russia, stable war insofar as, we're able to sort of...
They kind of assumed control of that region quite a while ago and basically have run it de facto since then.
Exactly. But so Turkish hardware seems to have been turning the corner. So look, I'll be honest, I've not found too many people online in the world saying that actually this is a geopolitical Turkey v Russia thing, but I personally think that's going on.
So then riddle me this, because one of the other headlines I've seen doing the rounds is that Turkey have been so they control the Straits of Hormuz, right?
Yeah,
and they have been one, if not the main, quote unquote, peace broker, in attempting to cease fire. And they're obviously, they have their hands in both pots. They definitely. Erdogan and Putin have a close connection, but also Turkey and Ukraine do a lot of deals as well.
Yeah.
So do you think Turkey are just trying to play both sides and like keep their cards close to their chest, and whoever wins, they win?
Well, I think what we're witnessing from the outside and probably not really understanding it is a genuine geopolitical sort of, discussion. Whereas the reason Turkey are involved is because they're like, hiya, we're involved. We are the other power in this region, particularly if you consider the Black Sea as being sort of the situation. I mean, normally mediators in things are either like completely and utterly neutral people, respected people from far away,
right?
Or they're people with
big players in the region.
Yeah. And I think, and if you notice as well, like, Turkey haven't been properly let in. They're sort of negotiating in Turkey, but it's Zelensky that's sort of saying, can we talk in Turkey? Zelensky also is sort of putting pressure on Israel as well. So Israel and sort of Turkey are both playing this we want to mediate game. Both seem to be being let in, but neither are sort of officially being 100% let in. They both, again, you've got this sort of, this is what I'm saying, I think there's actually some real regional Syria-based geopolitics going on, and that we in the West are sort of not really part of that story, and so maybe aren't really 100% aware. This of course might not be true. Hey, maybe he is just Putin. It's obviously not just Putin. It's very more complicated than individuals, but for ease, let's just run with that. Maybe he is just wanting Ukraine. Maybe he is just threatened by NATO, but I don't know.
I don't buy that narrative at all. No way.
No, exactly.
I do think.
That said, though, caveat.
Yeah.
I do think the expansion of NATO has been, a little bit, well, not a little bit, really aggressive and short-sighted.
Pretty gung-ho.
But I personally think, because there's a big problem. So there's this big thing. The FSB letters. Have you seen or heard of these?
Okay. No, I have not. So for those who don't know, FSB read KGB. They're the successor. So what are the FSB letters?
So the FSB letters is this supposed whistleblower in the FSB that has basically released some stuff about the war. And there's so much interesting stuff in it. Now, is it genuine? Isn't it genuine? I think the general opinion is probably genuine.
But there might be some bullshit in there.
Well, it seems to be so damning of the war effort and so damning of the situation in Russia internally that's led to this, that it obviously, the accusation is, does that play a little bit into the Western discourse of, corruption, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, so this is very interesting. So is this it? This is our Ukraine FSB whistleblower. Letter number 5, Gordian knot. So there's translation. So that it seems like there's a bunch of these letters.
Yeah. They're really interesting. But obviously, so why might they not be genuine? Well, they play a little bit into the Western discourse of, Putin's corrupt. It's all yes men. They've done something they didn't want to do, and now they're screwed. But why
and so, what are they purported to be? Just so I understand, are they leaked cables from SFB?
No, it's basically supposed to be a leaked bunch of letters from a guy that works in the FSB saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is going on. Here are all the reasons I can't believe going on." The main sort of what's the word? The big over. What's the word? Well, the top headline is: we were being asked by our superiors to give reports on what would happen if we invaded Ukraine. They ask us this sort of shit all the time. So we gave them the standard answer, which is, we'll be welcomed as heroes with flowers, and it'll be really easy and cheap, because that's what we do, because we don't want to lose our jobs. Because if we ever say anything that criticizes Russia, we get told to do our jobs better. And the idea is that this has happened, and this guy's basically saying, holy shit, if they did this based on the sort of stuff that I gave them, then this is complete nonsense, because what I gave them wasn't based on anything at all. So that's the top headline. And that's obviously where you got to think, well, this might not be genuine, because that feeds quite a lot into the Western discourse. However, why might it be genuine? Well, the sources seem pretty good, actually. The guy it's come from is somebody that sort of has got pretty good credentials and this sort of thing. And also there's a lot in there which is completely not in the Western discourse at all. And one of them, for example, being the concern that this guy has about the regiments, or the regiment, I believe, in Syria, that if this carries on, that they'll be completely cut off, and there'll be a huge mess. There's the implication in this that this whole war he calls it a very short-sighted and old-fashioned thing of like, things are going bad, i.e. in Syria, so we do this to make it okay.
So it's a way of distracting from that.
Distraction, yeah, or also just a very crude way of changing the negotiating table in Syria.
Speaking of crude, I think a lot of the narrative in the West we get is very crude and very simplistic. It's like, here's crazy Vlad, at the end of this long table, being like, I will reform the social. Do you know what I mean? It's like USSR forever, and it's like, you really think it's that simple? But most people don't sort of care to try and dig underneath that. They're like, okay, he's a madman, he's the new Hitler, and obviously you can draw comparisons all you want, and there are plenty of comparisons to draw. But the fact is,
that's the wonderful thing about history. There's always comparisons.
I mean, and there's tons of them. Like forced repatriation. One of the other things I was reading today here, I don't know if you've seen this story. Have you seen this? Is another one I was looking today. Unconfirmed reports of thousands being transported to Russia. So this is forced civilian deportation. So this gets crazy. So people who are saying, I've only heard it, I can't confirm it, but several thousand Mariupol residents have been deported to Russia. They've been issued papers that require them to be in a certain city. They have no right to leave it for at least 2 years, and they have the obligation to work at a specified place of work.
The thing is, so look, obviously this is awful, and I'm not saying it's not awful, but this is the thing as well. It's like, but then, this is what happens when places get occupied. If you occupy somewhere, you don't tend to allow people to go about their business as they want to. And so this is sometimes the narrative I get as well, when I'm a bit like, well, if it is a war, a proper war, then
it's not, Chris. It's a special military operation.
It's a special military operation.
Not realized
that. Exactly. And it's like, well, really awful, terrible things happen in war, and sort of reinforced repatriation. You might even say that's like, well, thank God they've maybe gone somewhere that isn't the front line.
Isn't Mariupol? Yeah.
I mean, it's just putting that out there.
Right.
Mariupol in particular seems to be, they've really picked up. But I didn't realize this until I was reading up on it. Mariupol, you see, is the big Ukrainian victory of the Crimean annexation, which I was unaware of until recently. This is
what I know of it is city of 4.5 million is Ukraine's main port into that water. It also is a massive city that basically blocks Russia. Since they annexed Crimea, it blocks them having a land bridge between Crimea and those two breakaway regions that are in effect Russia. And so Russia spent some hundreds of millions of dollars creating this big bridge that joins Crimea with mainland Russia. But obviously it's a bridge, and they'd rather just have the land. So they've surrounded it, and they're shelling the fuck out of it. They're bombing hospitals and civilians and all the rest of it. And if they take it, then I guess so. What do you think? I don't think so this is one narrative I've seen, and I don't think this is true. I don't think Russia's end game, quote unquote Russia, right, whatever the forces, the power behind the army, I don't think the end game is complete annihilation or conquest of Ukraine.
Yeah.
I think it's a land grab.
Yeah, so I think, well, I mean, obviously I've no idea.
Yeah, of course.
I think there probably was at some point, you know, if we are to assume that he expected to be welcomed with flowers, as is the standard trope, then he probably was like, and we'll just install a puppet government.
Right.
I think land grab is probably what he really wants right now, or what Russia really wants right now, as a way to sort of get a win. And I come back to my previous point that I wonder if all of this is about something elsewhere, i.e. Syria. Yeah, I just think I just think, I mean, you think about, for example, the links between, American foreign policy in the Middle East. It just sort of became a huge, we were involved.
Well, yeah.
We were the little brother in the whole thing. We sort of ended up getting involved in one thing after the other, and they were all touted as being separate things, but actually, really, they all boiled down to this first thing that we had done in Afghanistan, for example, and creating this huge power vacuum, and maybe not getting what we wanted, whatever that was that oil, was that terrorists, was that stability, who knows, and sort of ended up then fighting this thing where we sort of ended up having to do millions of other things because we'd made a mess. And I suspect that, so obviously I don't know anything about Russia internally, I will point out, say to everybody here who obviously thinks, what the fuck is Chris talking about? He doesn't know anything. He's like, no, I don't. I'm only knowing as much as I can sat here. But I just personally think that it's in Syria. I mean, that place is such a mess, and it's completely destroyed. I don't think any of the players there want to be there anymore, except maybe Turkey, who probably do actually quite want to be there a bit more. Because obviously they historically want the Kurdish regions.
So do you think? So do you think then the whole Syria thing? Because obviously America are involved in there because, well, originally they were fighting on the side of the
supplying
Kurds,
and that's because we went in that weird thing where after Iraq and after everything else we went, fighting doesn't work, maybe we give everyone weapons, it'll be like fighting,
we'll just arm them.
Turned out to be even worse.
You'd have thought. But from Russia's point of view, what's their advantage of being in Syria? Because, I mean, apart from just having someone else on their side in this increasingly bipolar geopolitical world.
But I think that's what it's about, because Syria war, off the top of my head, started 2011, I think.
I'll check it, yeah.
And I think Russia only get involved in 2015. So I was wrong earlier when I said 8 years. I think it's therefore 7 years. I think Russia only get involved in 2015. Officially. I mean, I'm not saying, undoubtedly they were involved.
So you're right, it began on the 15th of March 2011 as part of the Arab Spring, of course. The peak of the war was around 2015. So that would have been when ISIS had a massive amount of territory. Turkish forces,
so here we are
since 2016.
Since September 2015, Russia conducting airstrikes and military operations. So again, if you look at the time, I mean, look, again, unfortunately, I'm not nearly enough as an expert on this as I could or should be, but the color, I'm so sorry.
Color revolution.
The color revolution. So I'm so obsessed with that as well. It's terrible I don't know the proper name. So that's 2014, and so it's perfectly plausible in my brain that obviously Russia then decides to take a bigger front foot in Syria after the US and the UK and the West started to basically put weapons into Ukraine to aid the rebels there, uprisers, protesters, whatever you want to call them. So I think there's probably a situation where Russia were like, well, what the fuck? And therefore, okay, well, now we've got to be a bit more front-footed in protecting our areas of influence.
Yeah, so this is something I wanted to talk to you about, because this areas of influence, I've heard on the pro-Russia side, this is one of their biggest arguments of sphere of influence. And I think you did also mention that, look, NATO have
Yeah.
their own sphere of influence and have quite aggressively expanded it.
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, you could argue Russia have more aggressively expanded their sphere of influence, because that's how Georgia and Crimea,
in terms of actual sort of
they've actually
bullets.
They've taken over swaths of territory with guns rather than with treaties.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas NATO have just brought in like the Balkan states, or
But I completely agree. But then again, if what I always say, if the NATO expansion was so innocent and benevolent, why so willingly and keenly and quickly be interested in taking in all the ex-Soviet states? So this is the thing.
Yeah.
The NATO's done that amazing thing. Go, gosh, well, I think it's very strange that they're concerned about geopolitical areas of influence. It's like, well, that's interesting, because you've been mega expanding yours and sort of actively saying that you hope Georgia and hope Ukraine can come into it. And it's like, yeah, I think you're playing geopolitics too, but because you're not using a bullet.
NATO. But do you not think that that what Russia are doing now is surely just going to drive
people
into NATO's arms? I mean, if you were a satellite state and you saw what Russia are doing now in Ukraine, you'd be like, well, if I join up with NATO and they try that shit in my country, then NATO are going to fight back.
No, of course. No, I mean, and this, I think in that sense, yes, it could produce a much more polarized world and could bring NATO much more to Russia's doorstep. But you see, what this comes back to for me is that we, the West, forgive me, everybody, I will use terrible terms like we and they, because, unfortunately, that's the media I grew up in. But we didn't treat Russia very nicely when the Soviet Union broke up. So, when Germany went through their troubles, end of the Nazi regime, and indeed after reunification, the world put loads of effort into making sure that Germany was going to be stable, put loads of effort into making sure the post Treaty of Versailles mess would not happen again. Germany would not become looted by its own blah 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 blah.
Yeah,
and we didn't do that at all with the new Russian Federation. In fact, we basically left them to their own devices and sort of allowed them to become a corrupt,
an oligarch state.
Yeah, exactly. Forgive me if anybody doesn't think that's corrupt, but the kleptocracy of it all definitely is corrupt.
I watched this documentary the other day about how Abramovich made his money.
Yeah,
it's astonishingly corrupt.
Yeah.
And
we basically let that happen, and we sort of let Russia. We basically, what I'm saying is we were never friends to them. So we did this thing whereby they went through this monumental shift, and we basically never said, welcome. We did say welcome a bit where there was profit, but we didn't really say welcome. And obviously, bringing more and more people into NATO, in one's opinion, does not help that at all.
Well, because there was zero possibility of Russia joining NATO.
Oh yeah, right? No, dude, I'm not. But this is what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you bring Russia into NATO, but
no. But I was actually bringing that up to actually support your point, because it's like they were never going to be invited to that party. It's here's this great club. Yeah, they were never going to be offered an invitation.
Yeah, and also, I don't know if you know about the origins of NATO, but NATO was created to resist and oppose and defend against the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
and the Soviet Union ceases to exist, but NATO carries on. Now, many people would say to me, "Oh, that's because NATO's mission had changed and blah 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 had changed," and you're like, "Well, yeah," but at the same time, this explicitly anti-Soviet and therefore anti-Russian alliance.
But what would you say to people? What would you say to people who say that it was only created to avoid the horrors of the Second World War?
Yes, yeah. Well, the irony being, of course, we learned from the First World War that massive alliances don't.
You mean the League of Nations?
No, I mean the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. So it was like, this system will work perfectly if all the superpowers are allied in groups. Then it'll be great because war will never happen. And then one of them declares war on another one's satellite. It's like, oh no shit! Now all of the superpowers are in a battle. Yeah.
So one of the other things that I wanted to bring up with you is the, to my mind, quite extraordinary Western response to Russia, further isolating Russia, yes, and the Russian people, collateral damage in quite a brutal way, but the broad alliance, not even just Western, but like let's concentrate on Western. 141, I believe, countries in the UN condemned the action, which is more than just the West, but also all of the sanctions and the economic pressure and the companies dropping out and the even Germans sending military aid, all of this like broad alliance that we haven't seen for quite some time against Russia. That's one thing that I wanted to sort of get your take on. But then the pivot, because it's like, it's all very well turning against Russia, but let's face it, no country is an island. And part of the reason, like, for example, Germany was so in bed with Russia is because of all of this gas. And then I see this headline today: Germany agrees gas deal with Qatar to help end dependency on Russia.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, just on the note of the oil thing, I thought it was brilliant because when the sanctions first happened, everyone was like, "This is the beginning of net zero. This is the beginning of energy independence. No more fuel dependency." And now there's all these headlines about people making deals with Qatar, Saudi upping their export. I think Ireland were talking about this is going to be great because once the new nuclear deal is made with Iran, we can start to buy Iranian oil. And it's just like,
unless we forget what fucking Saudi Arabia have been doing for the last, I don't know, 7 years to the people of Yemen.
Exactly. No, I mean, dude, Yemen is awful. I mean, it's as bad, if not worse, than the sort of carelessness of the Syrian war. Although obviously, that could be the same. I'll put the asterisk here and say I'm well aware that Afghanistan and Iraq and all these things are terrible. So let's maybe not get into a league table of who does what awful thing.
No, of course.
But Yemen's diabolical. And was it they executed 81 blokes last year, Saudi, which is I think more than they've done in the last X. No, exactly. So this is the thing. I think what's a bit disappointing in some ways about the suddenly united response of the West. I don't know. Look, I'm a bit. How do I feel? I don't know. It's very difficult. This is one of the reasons why I hate geopolitics, because there's a difference between like what you want in the world. So, by the way, obviously, what I want in the world is socialism, glorious, propertyless socialism.
Some kind of united socialist republic, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe of the satellite. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but this is one terrible thing about geopolitics, and so therefore, I'm not particularly keen on the American British standard way of life. But then geopolitics turns up and you're like, right, so even though I sort of in many ways disagree with my society, it is nonetheless my society, my culture. And the horrible thing about geopolitics is you're like, well, actually all of a sudden, therefore, even though I don't like the side that I'm on, it is my side. Which I think is one of the most depressing things about sort of geopolitics in general, is you're like, well, the die is somewhat cast here, and this is my side. There's this one I once sat in on a talk with the ex-British ambassador to Warsaw, Sarajevo, and Moscow, and he said, every time there'd be a new government come in, there'd be a new foreign minister would come in and be like, we want to be friends with this person, and the British, what do you call it, Foreign Office, would be like, we can't, because historically they're not our friends. So it's like, well, what can't we do? No, you can't do deals with them because they're historically not our friends. These are our friends, these guys. And it's like, we don't like those guys. It's like, well, they're our friends. So how do I feel about the I don't know. I'm a bit concerned in a way about the sort of the glorious rise of, dare I say, militarism. I mean, obviously militarism in Germany is disappointing. Look, it's terrible to say that. Some blokes sat here in London and say German militarism is disappointing. Forgive me for casting aspersions on an entire people who have an extremely complex society and probably merely want to sort of, be a force of of moral good in a conflict. But personally, I quite liked their stance of saying, like, well, no, actually, we don't believe these sort of things are the answers.
Yeah, which is, I think it's an easier stance to take when you don't have what we're seeing today in Europe.
No, exactly. And who knows? Obviously, maybe I sound like the worst sort of peacenik in the world by saying that. I think what's interesting about the whole thing is that the geopolitics before now were in real shift. Like America was really on the down, even amongst us, the rest of its Western allies. Like we were all sort of, and that isn't just about Trump. Actually, that has origins in Iraq and Afghanistan. Trump obviously didn't help, and then Biden has sort of, well, until now, of course, and his attitude, or America's attitude, not his, there's no such thing as individuals, has been very different. And this is one thing, America's suddenly now back in the fold, and they're now very much back leading the way. All of a sudden they're needed and wanted again, if you will. Geopolitics was in real shift before. China were very much on the rise. It's obviously still are on the rise. They haven't suddenly stopped. But obviously all these things were happening without war. All these things were happening due to economics, due to peace, due to domestic politics. And now everything is potentially being drawn into a very, very sharp focus. And again, what I was talking about before about sides, all of a sudden sides are once again becoming the talk of the day.
So do you think there's some reality in which China does take a side? I can't imagine now this far in that they throw their weight behind Russia. I just don't see it happening.
I'm going to put my hands up here and say, hey, if I don't know anything about Russia, I know like nothing about China, because I mean, you need to be a real expert about China. But yeah, obviously, what do they do now? I mean, they're like, so obviously there's a lot of articles that go around. There's some articles that say this is exactly what China wants. They want a divided world, and they want this conflict. And then there are other ones that say, well, no, this has been terrible. China have actually been doing a very good job of increasing their geopolitical power without any of these crises. They have been absolutely on the rise, and now this sort of thing means that they might have to start to change their politics. Do they stay close to Russia? Do they leave Russia behind? Do they, because of the the sheer world response, which has been very strong, do they go, oh, okay, well, let's just build a world because, we're not done doing what we're doing yet? Big questions about what they do. And unfortunately, I don't know anything about
I don't think anyone does
to say what's going on.
It's a locked box, isn't it? Like if we think we've got some insight into Putin, like the amount of insight into Xi is even less.
But this is what I'm saying. I mean, I think this is why experts are important, because just here sort of about Russia. Well, what have we talked about here? I've banged on about the fact that I think it's all about Syria. Other people bang on about the fact that they think it's all about NATO, and then other people bang on about the fact that all sorts of things. And it's like, the reality is you and I in our lifetime may actually never know what it was all about. It's this wonderful thing that I learned. Really, like the First World War poets, right? Those guys that wrote poems about how terrible war was.
Yeah.
When do you think they got famous? When do you think people started to actually care?
The 90s?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, really late.
Yeah.
So it's actually a bit earlier than that. I think it's the 70s. But still, it's this weird thing, because you read it and you're like, oh, right. So during the war, immediately after the war, everyone knew how terrible it was because these poems were coming out.
Dulce et decorum est.
Look at all these poems. Everyone must have known how bad it was. And you're like, no, actually, for 80, well, no, hang on, for 60, well, for a good half century. No, there was none of that discourse on the First World War at all. The discourse was it was glorious and people died for their country, protecting what there was, and you're like, okay, so loads of people who experienced that war died without that narrative ever being introduced to the mainstream.
This is pro patron mori, right? It's
exactly.
I was in Chislehurst Caves recently. I don't know if you've ever been there.
I have never been to Chislehurst Cave.
A fascinating area in Kent, originally dug up thousands of years ago. Anglo-Saxons used it, Romans used it.
Great.
And then the First World War, it was used as a munitions store by the Royal Arsenal. And then in the Second World War, it began being used as like an air raid shelter, eventually expanding to the fact that there were over 15,000 people down in these caves.
Wow.
Some of them who started to live there, some of them who lived there for years.
Right.
And it was transformed into this whole underground society, this
Wow.
working thing. There was a hospital, there was a post office, there were lavatories, there was a bunk bed system, there were pitches. And yeah, it's this fascinating thing. But the reason I bring it up actually is not really because of the caves themselves, although they're well worth a visit, but there's a little museum area where they have printouts of newspaper headlines.
Right.
And there's this one on the day that they found out that Hitler had killed himself, but not Hitler had killed himself, that Hitler had died. And then the successor, I think his name was Admiral Dönitz, gives this speech being like, the United States and Great Britain, the Anglo-Americans, continue to try and push Bolshevism in Europe, but we will fight till the bitter end.
Yeah.
And the death of our leader will not go, in vain. And it's like he carried on fighting to the bitter end. And there's all these little bits in this little headline of like Hitler has died, and he was still fighting, and all of this. No one has any idea that what he's done is this massive suicide pact. It's complete. No one has any idea. It's just like breaking news, like you say. And it's like, well, how long did it take? It's like, this conversation in 2 days could be redundant.
Or
it could be valid for 25 years.
I may be exalted as the only person that understood the situation. Or I'll be like, what the hell is that guy going on about? It's miles from Syria. Exactly. And, and obviously I think in particular, I find in general the whole individual focus on Putin to be very, very interesting, because certainly obviously from a historical perspective, there are no such thing as individuals. That's like bad history to say that.
The great man of history.
Churchill versus Hitler versus Roosevelt, versus Stalin. That's like bad history. But then again, also you've got a situation, but although these people are not those, they're individuals. Individuals also have an effect, particularly when they are powerful. And so I would love to hopefully be alive when it works out what exactly is going on there on an individual level, because you hear all sorts of mental stuff going around. Did you see the guy, the old chap on BBC that's sort of going on about starting being on anabolic steroids?
No.
Yeah, I thought I don't know who he was.
Is this a clip on what? So BBC.
I think it was on like Newsnight. I don't know.
Assad was on steroids.
Not Assad.
Not Assad. Putin's on steroids. Yeah. And
I was like, I really hope you've got some good source material here, dude, because you are saying this on national television.
Let's see if we can find it. Okay, that sounds suitably insane.
Yeah, it sounds pretty mental, doesn't it? Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Lord Owen.
It's been a pretty dry podcast until now. Thank God Chris finally got something daft in at the end.
People know what they're doing. Firing at unarmed Ukrainians. Mr. Owen, I think his immunity is compromised either by corticosteroids given him for some other ailment, or he's on the steroids you give to people with body lifting and weightlifting. I wish we could see a video of this. Lord Owen.
He says it really, really normally, and nobody challenges him. They also don't engage with him. No one sort of goes, "You're a fool, Lord Owen," but nor do they say, "That's it, Lord Owen, you've smashed it."
But then there was this. Did you ever read Blitzed? Which was this book that came out, I think, about 5 years ago or something.
Oh, right.
Which good. It's incredible. It's basically a rundown of the whole of the Blitzkrieg. More the operation into France, but a lot of the advances that Germany made, especially in the race to Dunkirk and all of that.
Yeah,
they're as part of their rations, they had a certain amount of milligrams of something called Pervitin, which they took every single day, which is methamphetamines.
Yeah.
So they were banging speed the whole time. Wired to fuck, right? Yeah. And that's just well known.
Yeah.
But there's also the private journals of Hitler's personal doctor, who was a complete quack. He wasn't like a medical doctor. He just like kind of wormed his way in, and he was injecting Hitler with all kinds of stuff.
This is
like hydrocodone and all of this
It's what I really love about that fantastic film, Downfall, the German film In the
Yes.
Bunker, because it gives little hints to that. It's never there, but Hitler's a mess and he's being injected with all sorts of crazy things. But this is the sort of fascinating thing, isn't it? That's what I was saying before. Obviously, there's no such thing as individuals. It's all about broad social movements. But by the same example, there is also those moments.
And
That's him, Lord Owen. Yeah,
there he is. I can't find the exact clip. I can only find reporting on the clip.
What was so weird is that it was just really normal. That was the whole thing. No one it was right at the end. It was like the last thing anyone said before they said, "Thank you, good night for the week."
So he just says he's just addicted to steroids. You can get addicted to them. It's very difficult to get off it. Brings out aggression, makes a personality change. We don't have any. He's not presented any proof, but that seems to be his position. Who knows who Lord Owen is? I mean, Does he have any credibility?
I think he used to be a MP. I think he used to be a minister of something. I mean, hopefully for his sake. That's what I was saying when I was watching it. I was like, God, I hope you've got some good stuff here, dude, because you've just gone out on a wing here.
Politician and physician. Okay, so he's got some standing in that. He was foreign secretary from 77 to 79.
But where's he got? He's just made it. Where's he got his info? I mean, maybe he does. Maybe he knows the guy that's selling things to Putin. Who knows? But yeah, I thought it was a bit mental. I thought it was when he said it, I was like, have you just read that somewhere on the internet? And
what do you make of the pictures because now what's happened in Russia is they have silenced opposition in an unprecedented way, shut down any dissenting voices.
So it seems exactly, yes.
Draconian laws.
By the way, another piece of evidence for this possible FSB letters being interesting is that the FSO, which is like the secret police of the secret police, raided the FSB headquarters in the aftermath of the letters being released, and it's like, okay, so maybe something is going on. Yeah. That
definitely adds fuel to that fire, because why else would they do that?
Yeah. But again, get everybody, don't read those things. Don't read those letters as if they are 100% accurate, because we don't know that.
But wait, where was I going with that?
You're going that. What do you make of what's going on? They're clamping things down internally. They are.
So because of all those, the new laws that have been introduced, sort of like 15 years for quote unquote misinformation, which basically means we can lock you up for saying whatever we don't like. So there's this carefully manicured image that they're putting forward. And there's the Arnold video. I don't know if you've seen
that. God, it's amazing.
Incredible. I'll link to it in the show. My God, You've got to watch Schwarzenegger.
Apparently there was talk in the Obama administration of making him ambassador to Russia for these reasons, because there's sort of seemingly mutual respect. Anyway, go on.
But amongst all of that, we still have these official pictures of Putin, who's now like doing these rallies where apparently people are being forced to attend. But, in negotiations and stuff, you have this table that's so long that these are officially sanctioned pictures coming out of the Kremlin, where he is literally at the end of this crazy long table with his quote unquote closest advisors.
Apparently he's taken the isolation very seriously.
I wonder. See, this is where my conspiracy brain comes in. It's like, I know he was paranoid about COVID, but is this now quite a convenient excuse to make him seem like he is making all these decisions?
Well, yeah, okay. Well, and he isn't.
I can't imagine that he is making all the decisions by himself. I mean, he needs the oligarchs.
You think not? No.
It's not quite China, where it's like, remember Jack Ma? He's the Alibaba CEO. He's the richest man in China.
Right.
And they had him locked up for a couple of months. He disappeared.
Because he got powerful.
He got too powerful. So they just lock him up. Yeah. And he comes out and then he's like, I love China. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because but then so I am, when I say I'm not an expert, I'm an enthusiast. I'm a real enthusiast about all these sort of things. So for example, when he was making his opening speech about this, which was just before the invasion, he gave this huge speech about how the break of the USSR was a disaster, how Ukraine is any of these
It's not a real country.
None of these places are real countries, exactly. So I had to surf the BBC was telling me all about COVID restrictions, and I was like, a leader of the world is right now giving a mega full on speech. I had to watch it on Al Jazeera. And it was a really weird thing in that. Did you watch it? Have you watched it in full?
I haven't watched it in full, but I've watched some of it. Yeah.
But then this weird bit where like all of the other, I think actually it might be before, I can't remember if they speak before or after, because I think I saw it mixed up. But anyway, there's a bit where all the ministers sort of stand up and they sort of play lip service to what he's just said. And it's really weird because some of them definitely don't want to be saying it. Some of them are looking like they're absolutely shitting themselves. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about Russian internal politics to know exactly who these players are, but it was really strange to watch. And it was like, okay, choreographed, and sort of there's choreography going on. There's like lines being fed. There's people that don't want to say their lines. There's people that are being watched to make sure they say their lines. Very, very weird stuff going on there. But then you see again, people let's go back to what I said about the FSO raising the FSB. Might have nothing to do with the FSB letters, might be to do with the fact that he's some of these people that were looking nervous, FSB people apparently, obviously if we I think we can pretty safely say the war isn't going as well as Russia would have liked.
Yeah.
And so thus heads have got to roll. Maybe it's just that, but therefore by that example, heads have got to roll somewhere. Yeah, it's very weird what's going on there. But then again, you see, you've got to think about, again, we look at it from the outside and we go, well, that's fucking weird. You fucking Boris Johnson stood up yesterday, and was it today even? And
I think it was today.
The struggle in Ukraine is exactly the same as the Brexit vote. And you got to think, well, actually, if I'm someone external looking in, I'm probably going to be thinking that Boris Johnson is just as, Boris Johnson and therefore the UK is just as mental, corrupt, whatever as somebody looking in at Putin and seeing things like that. So you've always got to think about
for sure.
What it looks
I mean,
like
it goes without saying we are not here to shill for our government. They're a fucking shower of shit.
Oh god, aren't they terrible? Bless them. Yeah, and they're screwed, of course, because obviously we have been the main what's the word, melting pot. Well, I'm sorry, smelting pot's more accurate because it's talking about gold for all of the kleptocratic money coming out of the former Soviet Union. They've all been coming here, property, football clubs, whatever you want. And now all of a sudden we've been caught with our pants down and with our pockets full. And it's like, oh, hello, what? This isn't cool now, is it?
But we seized it all, Chris. Don't you think there's going to be some payout? Every British man gets £1.50.
Yeah, exactly. Could you love it? Yeah, he's telling, oh, thank you, sir. Here's your shilling.
It's awfully shiny, sir.
Exactly.
Oh my god.
So again, what is the because I've probably got to sort of wrap up at some point. I've got to go and help Pascal get ready.
Yeah.
What are our conclusions from this? That obviously, essentially, that we know nothing, but that we suspect about the mainstream discourse, quite rightly. Follow Bellingcat. That is, I probably could have just made this a 5-minute conversation and just said, follow Bellingcat, read everything they post, retweet, and do your own research around it. Yeah.
I think that's a good takeaway. Certainly Bellingcat, I didn't know about that. And
oh yeah, dude. You're about to go really in as well, because you've got 25 days worth of tweets to absorb now. Then you might come back to me. You might come out with a map going, it's actually all about.
If you haven't sent me too far down the rabbit hole.
Exactly. Nobody's thinking about Georgia. It's the Georgians. They've been here all along. Well, have they? Yes, indeed.
Oh, wow. Exactly. Yeah. No, but I hope she's okay, man. You must be worried
Yeah.
about her going
Yeah.
so close to the conflict. I genuinely do not believe Russia are going to set
No.
boots into any NATO country.
I don't think they
as
are
crazy
now.
as you think
It's
Putin might be.
in
It's
the
not going to
fervor
happen.
in the fervor of the first 3 days. It felt like it was inevitable, didn't it? But actually, no. And I think this is the other thing, I suppose, a leaving thought, which is why geopolitics can also be a real horrible thing, because we start to think about all of these abstract states as individual entities with what's the word, opportunities to take advantage of and risks to avoid. And but actually what's actually happening is there's millions of real life human beings really, really suffering.
10 million, this is the latest count, who've lost their homes, over
Exactly.
4 million refugees.
Exactly. And so I think, whenever sort of, it's not, I know it's not as simple as, are you pro-Russian or anti-Russian? It's not that simple.
No.
But let's, for the sake of this point, boil it down to that. It's like, well, fundamentally you just have to be like, well, we have to be against this horrible, awful thing. Who cares if NATO were aggressively expanding? Who cares if Russia deserve a sphere of influence? Who cares if actually the Syrian war's been going on for longer, and why don't we care about that? Who cares really? Because this has got to stop here. Actually, I suppose we should care about the fact that the Syrian war's gone on even longer.
No, and but it's not that you're saying that who cares as in like we shouldn't care about that, but it's like, but that shouldn't detract away from anything that we're seeing today. Some of the toxic debate I've seen online, it's like, oh, now we care about Ukraine, but we don't care about Yemen. It's like, no, we also care about Yemen.
Yeah,
but
what
now,
I always say about that is, what the weird thing is there that is like, that's weird because you're now, so what's happening is there's the correct reaction to a conflict, outrage, horror, sanction, and you appear to be trying to silence the correct response because it wasn't given before. I too am disappointed that we didn't respond, inverted commas, correctly before, but we're responding, inverted commas, correctly now. So let's please focus on the fact that we're responding, inverted commas, correctly now.
And let's hope nobody assassinates Zelensky, because I think we need that man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a shame you brought him up right at the end, because
I had to.
What an interesting character. I thought it was really interesting what Rob said, which is like, actually, no, like no one really liked, like it was like my mum voted for him, but no one really thought he was great. And then he sort of just suddenly they were like, the first speech he gave is like just came from a different man. Yeah. Really interesting. I thought the thing with Rob was really interesting because, again, you think you do all this reading, you do all everything, and then someone that's inside talks to you and you're like, oh, okay, that's amazing. Thank you so Rob, if you are listening to this, I really enjoyed listening to what you had to say. I'm sorry if anything that I've just said right now is a terribly academic, useless analysis of your real life situation.
Yeah, no, it's I'm sure he'll appreciate that. But that was kind of the idea of this, is to get a bit more of a zoomed out perspective. We've had Rob's side. We're going to have a Russian on the show soon as well.
Oh, well, that'll be interesting.
But thanks very much for giving your time, Chris.
Not at all. And let's do a funnier podcast at a later date when the Russian-Ukrainian war is dragged on for a decade and we don't care anymore.
You bastard.
I know, right? It could happen. Yeah.
All right.
See you later, dude.
See you later.
Have a good one, and I'll chat to you in a bit.
You too.
Cheers, man. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please give us 5 stars and consider becoming a subscriber and maybe even supporting us on Patreon. Really, really, really helps me continue making this show. If you haven't enjoyed it, then you can fuck off. Many, many thanks to Nils Hennis Steer for the amazing music and to Dave Fox for the cool artwork. Please keep coming back every week for more Bliss of the Abyss.